right, so free energy can be a measure of a system's instability or its tendency to change to a more stable state. Things have a tendency to move to a more stable state. And so during a spontaneous change, free energy decreases and the stability of a system increases. So this cellular respiration is a spontaneous reaction. It's exergonic or catabolic and releases energy. And so what happens is that from reactants to products, the free energy goes down. So the free energy goes down, and what happens is when these molecules have less free energy in them, they're more stable. All right, kind of think about a rubber band and shooting a rubber band. If you go like this to the rubber band, all right, it has more energy in it, but it's way less stable than if you have it just sitting in your hand. All right, it's less energy but more stable. All right, does that make sense? So the same thing goes with chemical reactions. And so equilibrium, when we reach equilibrium, that's the state of maximum stability. And we're going to learn that that we don't want that to happen inside the cell. We don't want a cell to reach equilibrium, and we'll see why that is. So this process is spontaneous and can perform work only when it's moving towards equilibrium. So we want it to move towards equilibrium and not reach it. So this gives you three analogies of what goes on inside the cell. And so one is inside the cell, or two can be inside the cell. This is going back to that diver on the platform. So you have all these pictures along the top. And you have the diver, this is showing you motion as they dive off, so from initial to final. And then we have diffusion, so molecules in a higher concentration in one spot diffuse and are in equal concentration, spread evenly. And this is a chemical reaction. We have one molecule and it's converted to many smaller molecules, so it exhibits a chemical reaction. So in looking at this, these three here are the initial states for their quote-unquote reaction. And these guys are your final states. What I'd like you to do is in the margin next in the row, like on the top row and the bottom row, I'd like you to write which ones, the top or the bottom, have more free energy. Which ones have more free energy? So we should have that. Which ones have more free energy? Initial or final ones? Initial. So these guys have more free energy. And we go to a state of less free energy. So what does that mean? What has higher GI? G initial is higher than your final. Final would be lower in this. For the chemical reaction, would energy be needed for this or released?
Release.
Yeah, it would be released because your delta G here is G final minus G initial. You have a lower number minus a higher number, which gives you a negative number, which means energy is released. Let me ask you this. I want you to write the ones at the top or the ones at the bottom. Which ones are more stable? which ones are more stable? Who wants to share what they put? Next.
I said the top one was more stable for the first picture.
For just the first picture?
Well, yeah, because you're looking at the second one, the second one might be more stable.
Might be more or less.
Or less stable on the bottom. But, alright, I think all of them are stable on the top compared to the bottom.
Okay.
At this point.
Why is that? Why would they be more stable?
Because they're not moving around, it's a potential energy. It's more uniform compared to when there's less free energy.
Okay, all right. When we look at this, when we look at more versus less here, I would say like this guy at the diving board here, all right? And I guess they're showing you them diving here. The end reaction is that he's going to be stand in the water, right, and be done. So that's really the end here. All right, so that's a little confusing with that one. So I would argue that he's less stable up here on the diving board than he would be standing in the water.
I thought it was like
While he's going down. Yeah, that's so that was a little confusing there. And so if these guys release energy, the ones that have the more free energy, that have even this molecule, you can't see here the molecule, but the bonds, there are more energy in the bonds, which means that it's a little bit less unstable than you have molecules that don't have a lot of energy in the bonds. They're very, very stable. And so therefore, it's actually the other way around where we go here, these guys are in a less stable state. So the more energy, think of that rubber band example, and then we go to a more stable state. And so that's how generally things move in our cells, going towards a more stable state. And so so that's a connection that I need you to make, is that the more energy, more free energy, less stable, more stable, less free energy. All right? And so let's apply this to our chemical reactions in our cells. So that's going to be applied to the chemistry in our cells. So I'm going to teach you a couple new vocabulary terms here. Exergonic reaction. You guys have probably heard of maybe from chemistry, exothermic and endothermic reactions. This is a little bit different. Exergonic reactions proceed with the net release of free energy and is spontaneous. What kind of pathway would this describe? Anabolic or catabolic? This is another way to say catabolic pathway. So you might want to jot that down next to it to make the connection between the four. So this is the same. It's the catabolic reaction. And then the second type of reaction, new term. Yeah.
I was going to say, does that make cellular respiration
Absolutely, yes. So in this, back to this, cellular respiration is catabolic, or we could say it's an exergonic reaction. So those two words are kind of meaning the same thing. So then the endergonic reaction is opposite. It takes in energy. You need energy from its surroundings, and this is considered non-spontaneous. And so, so we can write behind that, this is the same as anabolic. Okay? Anabolic and catabolic. So we have this picture here, this graph, and it's titled A, Exergonic Reaction. And so what we're looking at here, this is the free energy, and this is the progress of the reaction. So it tells you that this is an exergonic reaction. Can somebody tell me, if it did not label that this is an exergonic reaction, what gives it away in the graph to let you know that this is an exergonic reaction? How would you read this to be able to say, oh, This is an exergonic reaction because you should be able to do that.
Oh, well, it says that there's energy released, and you know that an exergonic or a catabolic reaction always releases energy.
That's right. Exergonic reaction releases energy, and so this is releasing energy. And so why is it releasing energy? If we look here, your reactants have a lot of free energy. This is your GI. So this is much greater, the free energy in your reactants, than in your products. We look here, your products, much less free energy. So the final is much lower. So remember back to our laws of thermodynamics, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. And so that difference has to go somewhere. It just doesn't disappear, so that energy is released. And so the difference in the free energy of your products versus your reactants, when you subtract that, you get a negative number. Delta G is the final minus the initial, and so we're going to get a negative number. Low number minus a high number gives you a negative, and so therefore energy is released and can do work. All right, absolutely. And so then we look at the next reaction, and this is Endergonic, and so it's just the opposite. So your reactants have a low free energy, so that's your G initial. Your products at the end go all the way up here, go all the way, and so that you have a high free energy, so that's your GF. And so where does the energy come from? How do these molecules don't have a lot of energy and then they end up with molecules that do? That's your input of energy from the environment, and that's because energy can be neither created nor destroyed, so it has to come from somewhere else here. And so therefore the difference between the free energy in your reactants and your products, that's your G minus GF minus GI, is the amount of energy that would be required, and this is greater than 0, so this is always going to be a positive number. All right, so those are the things so if you look at a reaction and the delta G, if you look at it, is positive versus negative, then that you can work backwards from that. You can say, okay, if it's positive, that's an endergonic reaction, which is also an anabolic reaction, which means that your final free energy in your products is more than your initial free energy in your reactants, and kind of the thought process there, working backwards. All right, so what I'm going to have us do, take a second, is let me put this down so we can actually see. All right, I have a table here. I'm dim the lights here. I have a table with different columns. The first column is the name of the reaction, and we have 3 different reactions: hydrolysis of sucrose, triglyceride attachment, and photosynthesis. For each one of these reactions, if we go in the rows here, I give you the reactants and what are the products, and then I give you the delta G, but I give you the absolute values. So I'm not telling you if the delta G is a positive or negative. So I just gave you, this is the amount of energy in arbitrary units here. This is the amount of energy that is either needed or is going to be released. So that when it says the table shows some reactions and the absolute values of their associated free energy changes. So your job, I want you to look at each one of these reactions, and I want you to try and tell me what you would expect delta G to be. Would this be a positive or a negative 7? Would this be a positive or a negative 3.5? And so on. And then I want you to tell, after you tell whether it's positive or negative, I want you to tell me whether or not that reaction would be spontaneous or not. All right? So you can work together with your table groups if you'd like to. All right? So I want you to try and make sense of this.
Okay.
Alright guys, so
I think the first one would be negative.
This away so that you can't hear your conversation.
well, it's right now.
I don't know about spontaneous.
She put absolutely. She had the first one was
I don't know about that one, but you can wait on that one. Oh. You're right.
Alright, so let's talk about this. Okay, so let's talk about the first reaction, hydrolysis of sucrose. So our reactants are sucrose and water. Sucrose, remember, is a disaccharide. So it is made out of two monosaccharides. The two monosaccharides are glucose and fructose, and they're hooked together. So when it says sucrose plus water, so we take this disaccharide and we add a water molecule, which does what to the molecule? Breaks it down into an individual glucose, which is a monosaccharide, and a fructose. And so then you have 7. And so what do you guys think? Is that gonna is that extra or endergonic? Is it gonna be a positive or a negative, do you think?
Oh, sorry. We thought it would be negative. So exergonic.
Yeah, it is. In general, the hydrolysis of organic molecules is an exergonic reaction. And so so we have exergonic, which would mean that it's a positive 7, which then, would that make it spontaneous or no? Spontaneous
Should that be
as
a
a
negative?
general rule
A
to think
negative
of it.
7?
Huh?
Should that be a negative 7?
Oh, did I say it's negative? Sorry. Negative, you're right. Just checking to make sure you guys pay attention. As a general rule, spontaneous reactions means that the reaction increases the entropy of the universe. And so do exergonic reactions, is that true about them?
Yeah.
Yes. And so this would be considered. All right. The next one, triglyceride attachment. So your reactants are glycerol and a fatty acid. So this pulls in some things from chapter 5. Glycerol and fatty acids are the molecules that are used to make a triglyceride. Triglycerides, remember, is a glycerol molecule, which is a 3-carbon alcohol. And usually we attach 3 fatty acids to make your triglyceride. But we have just 1 fatty acid. So you have this long fatty acid chain, this hydrocarbon chain. And we're going to attach them together. And so when it says glycerol plus fatty acid, we're going to attach them. And this is a monoglyceride. Then we could make a triglyceride by adding 2 more fatty acids. So the attachment of that, do you think it needs energy or releases energy? What do you think, Raymond? Yeah, it absorbs energy. So therefore, is it going to be a positive or a negative number? Positive. And so this is going to be a positive 3.5. And is this going to be spontaneous?
No.
No. So this is non-spontaneous. And then lastly, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, the plants take carbon dioxide and water and build a glucose molecule and then release 6 oxygens as a result of that. And that's 686. Is this do you need energy or is energy released for this? What do you think?
We thought this was going to be an, oops, I wrote it wrong, but it would be an endergonic reaction and would be non-spontaneous because you're building something up and it would decrease the entropy.
That's right. Absolutely. And so this we should, so would our number be positive or negative?
Positive.
Positive. So our number is positive, it is non-spontaneous, and is an endergonic reaction or anabolic. Okay, as a result. How'd you guys do on that? Good? Good? Okay. All right. So let's move on then. So, equilibrium and metabolism. So, chemical reactions in reaching equilibrium versus not reaching equilibrium. Reactions in a closed system eventually reach equilibrium and do no work. We talked yesterday, are living things closed systems? No. Living things like cells are not in equilibrium. They are open systems. And what does that mean? You exchange with the environment. So there's a constant flow of materials into a cell and materials out of the cell. And therefore that creates a state of not being in equilibrium. And so we're going to look at a catabolic pathway that releases energy in a series of reactions and I'll show how what happens to this pathway when it reaches equilibrium versus not. And your book gives an analogy of open and closed systems and reaching equilibrium versus not, utilizing a hydroelectric system, which is the flow, water. The flow of water turns a turbine, which generates electricity to light a light bulb. So that's what your next series of pictures are about. So there's picture A, B, and C that's labeled A, B, and C underneath the picture. Just look at A and B for a second. And what I'd like you to do is to label which one is open and which one's closed. Which one's an open system and which one's a closed system between A and B. This one versus this one. Open and closed. So we should have that A is a closed one. And this is because you have no exchange with the environment. So you have these canisters with water. There's no water coming in. There's no water going out. So that is the definition of a closed system, that there's no exchange with the environment. So I'm going to look this up because I'm going to write it. So let's, if we look at this, so in this, let's just look at this setup here. You have the water flowing downhill, turning, generating electricity, lighting the light bulb. This could be represented as your GI, your free energy initial, and final. Which one's higher, initial or final? Initial, right? And they're trying to show you this, that this has free energy. Notice here it's up, all right? So this has potential energy due to its location, and therefore can flow downhill and can do work that way. And so this is the delta G is the final minus the initial. So we have your higher final minus your lower, sorry, I did this. There we go. All right. So your higher, what did I just write this
The
one?
final should have the arrow.
I wrote them both like that. So I did something wrong here. All right, so this is a lower number minus a higher number, and therefore we get our delta G. This is our negative number, and this is able to do work. But what happens is when you don't have an inflow or outflow from the environment, what ends up happening is equilibrium is reached. So in this case here, your free energy in both their initial and final are the same, and in this case, it's 0. And it's because we take the both of them and subtract them, since they're the same, we get 0. So therefore, we don't get a net release of energy, but we don't get an input of energy either. And so if we do this analogy with cells, this situation, our cells would be dead. All right, so this, we don't want to get into a state of equilibrium. And so what we want is always an influx of things coming in and an outflux of things coming out, so that we never reach equilibrium and work can always be done, which is what the next picture is showing you. So B is showing you this open system. So in our cells, these are things, this influx of water coming in would be the things, food, oxygen, things coming into our cells that we need. And then there's an outflux of waste, so waste products and so on that our cell will get rid of. And so we always have never reach equilibrium here. And so we have still our initial higher than our final is the same as before, but they're never going to reach equilibrium because of our input and output with our environment. And so we still have a negative G, but the light bulb stays lit all the time and never goes out because of that. So we don't want to be in a state of equilibrium. So this next picture shows you more realistically what happens in a cell. So notice it says a multi-step hydroelectric system. And so, so we have multiple steps releasing energy to light multiple light bulbs. So let's relate this to the cell. So I talked about cellular respiration, that these are your reactants, these are your products, but this arrow really represents many steps in between that needs to be taken to get to this endpoint. And so that's what this is trying to show you here. So if we were to, let's say that these are molecules A, B, C, and D, let's say. Okay, so molecule A here is our first reactant. So I'm going to call this reactant A. And in our first reaction here, reactant A gets converted to product B. All right, and so this is reaction 1. Is this reaction, this first part here, is that ender or exergonic?
Exergonic?
No.
No.
This is, let's look at here. Which one has a, this is a higher free energy, lower free energy. Final minus initial is going to be negative. So therefore, that means it's exergonic and energy is released.
Okay.
All right, follow that thought process?
Yeah.
All right, so this is an exergonic reaction. So this first little reaction here this is exergonic, and energy is released. Then what happens in our cells is now reaction number 2 occurs. So now product B, that was the product of this reaction, becomes the reactant of the next reaction. So reactant B gets converted to product C. This is reaction 2. Is this reaction exergonic?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so this is an exergonic reaction as well. Why? Because now, even though product B had lower free energy than A, it has a higher free energy than product C. And so, therefore, it's exergonic. And so, therefore, more energy is released, and we have a second light bulb lit. And then, then the last one is this now becomes reactant C. Gets converted to our final end product, D, and this is our third reaction. And this also is exergonic. Why? Because now this is the free energy initially has higher than D, and you can see that location-wise here. And so therefore we get at the end. And so what happens is like this exergonic reaction here of cellular respiration, this is how that works. We don't get these guys in one reaction converted to these guys and get a bunch of energy released all at once. What we do is we slow it down into multiple steps. Each step releases a little bit of energy, all right, until eventually you get to your end product. So oftentimes we see this written as A gets converted to D, all right, and so this is an exergonic reaction, but really it's the sum of a bunch of smaller exergonic reactions. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So really what you could do is if you took the G final here, the free energy here, final minus how much free energy here, and get a number, that's the same as adding up final minus initial here, final minus initial here, final minus initial here. Adding those up will give you the same number. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And so a lot of our reactions are like that. And so, okay. Moving on. So let's look at this molecule of ATP that's important in chemical reactions. ATP is a main energy molecule in the cell. So very, very important to do cellular work. So there's 3 kind of categories of cellular work. So mechanical is one. Mechanical is involved in like movement. Can somebody think of something that might be an example of cellular work that might involve movement? Something to do with the cell that might need energy. The endomembrane system, what about it?
How it's transported and moved from organelles.
That's right, the organelles from the transport vesicles moving from, let's say, the rough ER to the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi apparatus to the cell membrane. So if you recall from our cell chapter that some of those organelles can ride along, do you remember the cytoskeleton, the microtubules, kind of like a subway system? Mm-hmm. That's an example of mechanical movement inside of a cell. Another example of mechanical movement would be like a unicellular organism that has those little hair-like structures, cilia. And those cilia have to move in order for the organism to move. That would be another example of mechanical movement inside of a cell. The second category is transport. What kind of transport needs energy?
Active transport.
Active transport, when things go from low to high concentration. So active transport would be that. And then lastly, chemical reactions. And what kind of chemical reactions would need energy? What category of chemical reactions? Roman? So an example would be cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, does it need energy? Does it?
No, but it releases it.
It releases energy. So that's not a work, right? That's not work from the cell. The cell gets energy to do work from that. So what would be an example of chemical reaction that needs energy? Photosynthesis would be an example of that, absolutely. So photosynthesis would be a chemical reaction that needs energy. So that's a specific example. So we could say in general, what types of pathways need energy? Anabolic. What's another way to say anabolic? Endergonic. So in general, the chemical reactions that need energy are anabolic or endergonic reactions, and photosynthesis is an example of that.
Oh, that's
All right,
under the chemical.
so to manage these resources, energy resources, our cells do what we call energy coupling. I used this word yesterday to introduce this. A couple means two, right? So energy coupling, the use of an exergonic process to drive an endergonic one. If you have a reaction that needs energy, that reaction is never going to go unless that energy is supplied from somewhere. So often the energy is supplied from an exergonic reaction. So you have to have these two reactions occurring simultaneously so that the exergonic reaction can run the endergonic reaction. So in comes the use of ATP. So let's look at the structure of ATP. ATP is called adenosine triphosphate. And it provides energy for cellular functions. And here's the structure of ATP. ATP has three major parts. So adenine, ribose, and then your three phosphate groups. So where do we know adenine from? This is a molecule we've talked about before. Roman?
Is it like one of those
It's the A in the DNA, the nitrogenous bases of the nucleotides, A's, T's, C's, and G's in DNA. Adenine is the A. And so adenine is in ATP as well. And then we have ribose. Where do we know ribose from? Just remember where ribose comes in, Nathan?
the sugar in RNA?
It is the sugar in RNA, absolutely. And then we have our three phosphate groups. Phosphate group is one of our functional groups. So this molecule is called adenosine triphosphate. So the triphosphate comes from three phosphate groups. Adenosine is the molecule that we call just this part here. So the adenine connected to the ribosome, that's adenosine. And so therefore, hence the name adenosine triphosphate. But adenosine is really an adenine and a ribose. And so what happens is we use this ATP to get energy. So does anybody can anybody remember, I talked briefly about it a while ago, how we get energy out of ATP?
Phosphate group is taken off.
Yeah, we take off a phosphate group, and it's the phosphate group at the end. So this phosphate group comes off, and that releases energy. And so this reaction, therefore, would be what kind of reaction? Exergonic, because it's going to release energy when we do that. So what's the process by which we do this? We add a water to break the last phosphate off. Now, why does this release energy? So let's look at the phosphate groups. Notice the oxygens. What kind of charge do the oxygen atoms have? Negative, right? So you've got these negative charges next to each other. What do we know about same charges? Do they attract or repel? They repel. So the bonds between these phosphate groups are very unstable. So they're very high energy. So we break those the bonds, and energy is released because of that. And so what happens is, if we break the phosphate group off, energy is released, and we end up with a molecule that's more stable because we got rid of one of those negative phosphate groups. And so, so let's write that down. The bonds between the phosphate groups of ATP's tail can be broken by hydrolysis, adding water. And the energy that's released in this process happens when the terminal or the end phosphate is broken. And the release of this energy comes from the chemical change to a state of lower free energy. So ADP has lower free energy, is more stable than ATP. So that's what this picture is showing you here. So here's your ATP molecule, and you have that water coming in here. So what that water is going to do, the water is going to be added here, and an OH is going to go to one, and an H is going to go to another. So therefore, the phosphate group is broken off. So here we have, notice here's the phosphate group broken off. Notice it says P with a little sub-I. The I stands for inorganic. What does that mean? Whenever you see a P with a sub-I, it just means that the phosphate group that's not attached to an organic molecule, all right? And so it's kind of off by itself, it's not attached here. So not attached to organic molecule. So that's all that means. So the phosphate group is off. Now we have ADP because we have 2 phosphate groups. And that's called adenosine diphosphate. And this releases energy, which means it's an exergonic reaction. And actually, I'm going to tell you the free energy that's released. So if it releases energy, what's my delta G going to be, positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative, right? And this is actually at 7.3 kilocalories per mole. Kilocalories are a unit of measurement. And so kilocalories, 1,000 calories. There are 2 different kinds of calories. There's literally, when you spell the word calorie, there's a lower, if you spell it with a lowercase c, it's 1 unit of measurement. If you spell it with a capital C, it's the same as a kilocalorie. So a capital C calorie is 1,000 little c calories. And the kilocalories are the big C calories. This is what we measure energy in food. So when you read the back of food labels and it tells you how many calories is in it, it's a big C calorie, or really it's telling you kilocalories. All right, and so it's a unit of measurement of energy. And so this is how much energy is released. All right, negative, the negative just tells us it's released. 7.3 is the quantity. All right, you don't have to memorize that number or anything like that. All right, so in the cell, the energy from the exergonic reaction of ATP hydrolysis can be used to drive an endergonic reaction. So ATP hydrolysis, breaking down ATP, we just said that releases negative 7.3 kilocalories per mole. All right, so then it says that this can drive an endergonic reaction. So this is going to drive, guys, an endergonic reaction. And what is true about an endergonic reaction in terms of delta G? Is it going to be positive or negative?
Positive.
Positive, right? And the positive means that it's going to need energy. So it's going to need so much kilocalories per mole. If the breakdown of ATP is going to drive an endergonic reaction, what has to be true about this number?
It's greater than negative 7 or 7.3.
Greater? Well, let me ask you this. What if I put a 14 in here? What is that telling me? It tells me that this endergonic reaction needs this amount of energy to run from the environment. So if I take an ATP and break it down, is it providing me that amount of energy?
No.
It's only providing me 7.3 kilocalories. So if I broke down an ATP, would it help me with this reaction? No. I maybe can use 2 ATPs to do that, all right? But one is not going to do the trick for me. So if this ATP breakdown is going to drive the endergonic reaction, what has to be true about this number? Yeah, so this has to be less than 7.3. So an example would be 6. Alright, then when this is released, it can use 6 of those to drive this, and we have an extra 1.3 kilocalories of energy.
Could it be the same?
It could be the same. Yes, absolutely, it could be the same. Roman?
The hygiene from the exergonic
The negative in this case means that it's released. It doesn't mean you have negative 7.3 energy. Okay. All right. Okay, so overall, the coupled reactions would be exergonic. So in my example here, you break down ATP, it releases 7.3 kilocalories. 6 of that can be used to drive this, and then we have an extra 1.3. And so therefore, when we couple them together and look at them together, it's collectively exergonic, which is what this picture is showing you here. So this picture, we have an endergonic reaction here. We're going to put these two molecules together to build a larger molecule. We need 3.4 kilocalories per mole. That's the amount of energy we need. ATP breakdown is exergonic. It releases 7.3 kilocalories per mole. So therefore, when we break down ATP, 3.4 of this amount of energy can be used to drive that endergonic reaction. That means that collectively then we have an excess of energy, 3.9. So those two coupled together would be considered exergonic together. All right, because we collectively have a release of energy. All right? All right, this is a good place to stop for today.